Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, tell me if this sounds familiar. Do you ever feel like your brain is basically a radio, but it's somehow tuned to like 5 different stations all at the exact same time? Well, today's Explainer is literally going to change how you see yourself. We're going to decode exactly why that seemingly scattered brain of yours isn't broken or distracted. It's actually this incredibly rare, highly sophisticated psychological framework. So get ready, because we are mapping out the exact architecture of your mind. Here's the blueprint we're looking at today. We'll start with the scattered brain illusion, then build the pillars of polymathic perception, look at the burden of depth, dive into metacognition and humility, and finally wrap up with mastering the multi-lens mind. Let's get right into it. Part 1. The scattered brain illusion, or why you feel like you just can't pick a lane. Let's start with a really common pain point. Honestly, a lot of you have probably spent your whole lives feeling like an outsider. You know, constantly being told by teachers or bosses to just pick a lane already. It feels incredibly isolating, right? But to really get this, imagine going through life constantly hearing the baseline of a history lesson, the melody of a complex scientific theory, and the lyrics of a deep philosophical debate, all playing in your head at once. Now, imagine realizing everyone else is just blissfully stuck on a single track. That mental noise you're hearing, it's really not a lack of focus. Actually, what feels like overwhelming mental noise is a totally validated psychological architecture known as polymathic perception. This isn't just some quirky hobby where you have a bunch of random interests. No, it's a rare cognitive framework. This kind of perception allows you to bridge entirely different worlds and essentially see the source code of reality. You aren't distracted. You're just processing a massively wider spectrum of information than most people. Moving on to Section 2, the pillars of polymathic perception. This is the foundation of how you actually think. The very first layer of this mental architecture is something psychology calls concept-based thinking, and the difference here is huge. Traditional thinkers, they're usually trapped inside the rigid structure of just one field of study. They store facts, but polymathic thinkers, you store concepts. This is exactly why you can effortlessly jump from, say, coding software in the morning to analyzing 18th century philosophy by the afternoon. To anyone watching, you look totally random. But inside, your brain is actively cross-training. You're seamlessly grabbing the exact mental model that perfectly fits whatever problem is right in front of you.
And that natural ability to cross-train, it leads us straight into the second pillar, systems thinking. Highly intelligent multi-lens folks don't just see isolated floating facts. They see how everything is deeply connected. Like when you read about a historical event, you're not just memorizing dates. Your mind automatically zooms out. You instantly start wondering, wait, how does this connect to our modern economy? Or current culture, or just fundamental human behavior? You're constantly hunting for those macro-level connections. So when you combine that concept-based thinking with systems thinking, you get this incredible 3-step engine called predictive processing. Step 1, you ingest a ton of data to spot hidden patterns that everyone else just writes off as random noise. Step 2, you connect those historical and contextual dots. And then, step 3, you run these intense internal simulations. You're basically playing out scenarios 10 moves ahead. And you do all this so you can spot and fix flaws before they ever even happen in the real world. It's pretty wild. All right, Section 3, the burden of depth, the absolute weight of having a multi-lensed brain. Now, we really need to talk about the heavy, load-bearing stress of this, because thinking in these massive, complex layers instead of simple, contained circles, it comes with a lot of weight. Your analytical depth is super often, and super frustratingly, mistaken by others as just simple overthinking or needless anxiety. Research shows this multi-lens brain faces some really specific struggles. First up, you probably experience this constant, burning impatience with inefficiency. Why? Because your brain connects dots and projects outcomes way faster than a traditional thinker. You also deal with what psychologists call contextual identity shifting, plus the sheer exhaustion of managing complex, layered memory systems. But honestly, the toughest part might be your inability to just take one side in an argument. You're this brilliant strategist because you effortlessly see the valid logic from every single perspective, which unfortunately can sometimes leave you feeling like you don't even have a fixed identity of your own. Which brings us to Section 4, metacognition and humility, essentially watching yourself think. Let's dig into one of the absolute most sophisticated parts of this perception, metacognitive IQ.
This is your remarkable, almost eerie ability to detach from and literally observe your own thoughts in real time. Because of this, seeing the vast complexity of the world naturally breeds a really deep intellectual humility. See, thinkers with a single lens, they argue to win. They are desperately hunting for that one single truth. But a polymathic mind, you argue to understand. Because you watch yourself think and you actually recognize the gaps in your own knowledge, you realize there is rarely just one objective truth. Instead, you see that there are multiple cultural and logical lenses to view any given problem through. And finally, Section 5, Mastering the Multi-Lens Mind, the Duality of Genius. So, we've built the architecture, but how do you actually live in it? Well, the ultimate mastery of the polymathic mind requires balancing a really tricky duality. On one side, you have your raw intellect. This is you processing the world on a completely different frequency, far beneath the surface, constantly running those simulations and systems we just talked about. But on the other side is your emotional intelligence. True mastery isn't about throwing around the biggest, most obscure vocabulary words to prove you're smart. Not at all. True mastery is using your emotional intelligence to take those 20 complex mental layers and completely simplify them. It's about meeting people exactly where they are and communicating in a way that makes them feel smart, rather than just overwhelming them with your depth.
Look, if you have always felt like an outsider, someone who bridges these incredibly diverse hobbies and interests and work in these invisible ways that nobody else quite grasps, I want you to remember this super validating truth. Your mind is absolutely not too much. It's just beautifully structurally layered. You aren't inherently hard to understand. You're just not meant to be understood by absolutely everyone. And you know what? That is a superpower. It's not a flaw.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Keep thinking in layers. Are you a natural pattern hunter? Do you see the source code where everyone else just sees noise? Well, now that you actually have the blueprint of your own mind, the real question is, how are you going to use this magnificent architecture today to shape the world around you? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.